Hi guys. So The Last Jedi is probably the most divisive movie I have ever seen. And it seems like when you walk out of the theater, you're in one of two groups of people. You're in the group of people who say they absolutely love it, and it may be the greatest Star Wars movie of all time. Or you're in the group of people that absolutely hate it and say it's the absolute worst Star Wars movie of all time. And it seems like there's no middle ground, with the rare exception of somebody who's still trying to decide on what group they're going to be in. And I wanted to talk about that today because I think this is a real problem. Not the fact that people have different opinions, but in the way people are treating each other after this movie. It seems like people are so outraged, and sometimes the angriest people make the most noise, and as a result of that, we are fighting with each other. And I see a lot of people being very ugly to each other, and it bothers me. If this movie really bothered you, I understand that. And I think as we talk to each other about this movie, one of the things that we need to do is really try to communicate and kind of follow, the lessons that Star Wars has always taught us, and that it's about being good and kind and and kind of like Jedi principles in a way, because I see a lot of people turning to the dark side, so to speak. So one of the things is I want you guys to know, personally, I like the movie, but I was kind of in the camp of I need to decide how I'm going to feel about this movie because it ends pretty sadly, and we probably are going to have to talk a little bit about spoilers. I'm going to try to keep it mostly spoiler free, but we're going to talk a little bit about spoilers in this movie. It does end sadly, and so when you're walking out of the theater, it's very easy to walk out in a sad mood or disappointed or upset, because I think, at least for me, it didn't do exactly the things that I personally would have done if I were making the movie. But however, I'm not a movie maker. That being said, after having slept on it and after having thought about it again, it's easier for me to kind of put everything in its place and think about all the highs and the lows and think about all the amazing things that were in this movie. And I think if you're talking to somebody who hates the movie, I think you guys need to try to acknowledge the other person's perspective. If you love the movie and you're talking to somebody who hates it, try to understand why they hate it. And if you hate the movie and you're talking to somebody who loves the movie, try to not just attack them and say that they're stupid for disagreeing with you, or did we watch the same movie, but try to actually explain specific things that you didn't like. Try to explain specific choices that maybe you disagreed with, and then perhaps you can even come to some understanding. And you don't necessarily have to agree. It's important if you try to understand somebody, because I think that's one of the best things about this movie, is that it can get us talking and discussing, and discussing controversy for years. But we don't necessarily have to fight about it. I don't want to fight with people for years. I want to discuss things with people for years. Respectfully disagree, civil discourse, all of this stuff is fine as long as we act like adults about it. So one of the things I want to talk about also is the humor. I understand that some people weren't a fan of the humor in this movie. I personally thought it felt a little bit out of place. So I understand those that didn't like the humor. Parts of it didn't feel like it was Star Wars humor. And a contrast to that, as a friend brought up, if you look at Rogue One, and if you look at like K2SO, and that humor that was in that movie, it was very subtle. It was funny, but it was very subtle, and it felt kind of like adult Star Wars, grown-up Star Wars. Whereas in this one, it was very slapstick. It was, very crude in some places. And it almost kind of took you out of Star Wars for a moment. So I understand that criticism. However, I still enjoyed it. And I think that's one of the biggest points that I kind of want to make as I talk about this whole video, is that it's possible to enjoy something even if it didn't meet your exact expectations. And I hope that you can do that, because I think the best case scenario is that even folks who hate this movie find a way to enjoy it and to appreciate it. And I think also those that love this movie find a way to at least understand the criticisms and try to understand the people that didn't enjoy it, or that had problems with it. So another thing is, if you hate this movie, I would also encourage you to try to look at the parts of the movie that were great, because no matter what you say, I'm pretty sure you can probably find at least 2 or 3 parts about this movie that were amazing. Because I think there were a lot. But if not, okay. But I encourage you to go watch it again, because after a second viewing, everybody who has seen this a second time, well, correction, most people that I've talked to that have seen this a second time have said it's so much better the second time around. And I think a big part of that is because the way the first movie shocked you. There was a lot of shock, and in the way it left you kind of walking out disappointed and depressed. And I think as we come to terms with, wait, those people who are gone aren't really gone forever. There's, you know, all kinds of ways for, you know, these people to come back. Well, except for in the case of Leia, because Carrie Fisher can't come back. And they've said that they weren't going to use her again, and I think there's all kinds of different ways that can play out. But what's specifically with Luke, there is, you know, there's plenty of ways for him to come back, especially as a Force ghost and guide. And I think seeing him come back and talk to future generations as a Force ghost, probably Rey, but who knows who else. I think that will be very powerful. I think it will be meaningful, and I think it will kind of be like a warm hug for those who are really traumatized at the loss of Luke. So I think that's important. I also think that basically if you have had a hard time, you know, trying to understand the plot holes in this movie, that some of those can also be explained away if we can talk to each other. Because one of the bigger criticisms I've seen is not just, you know, losing people or specific decisions, but the plot as a whole. This was a kind of a big deal to me. Is the plot has things that I found were more of a contrived scenario rather than a plot hole. To me, for me, a plot hole is something that just makes no sense at all. In the case of this movie, there were certain plot parts that I thought felt really forced on the audience just to get something going on, but it wasn't a full-blown hole. So I'm going to talk some specifics here, just to give a few examples. Finn calling Maz Kanata. That seemed like a real stretch. I mean, and it can be explained away, but it just seems like Finn knew so much about the First Order, it would have made more sense for him to know a way to get on that ship, as opposed to, oh, well, let me call somebody that I only met one time for like 2 seconds, you know, because they obviously know how to get on board this ship. Like, that seemed like a real contrived thing. We can explain it away if we want, if we're willing to talk and say, okay, well, he doesn't know that many people to begin with because he's left the First Order. Who else does he know? You know, he can't call Chewie, he can't call Han, because Chewie's out of comms range and Han is beyond. So if you think about it, who else did he know? He hardly knew anybody else. I would think that he would have gone to Poe and you know, and tried to do something else that way. But all of these little things, I'm okay with it though, because it led to this thing on Canto Bight, and I really enjoyed the Canto Bight scenes in the story because it actually dealt a lot with the characters and it helped Rose's character tremendously. It helped pave the way for the future, and there was a lot of depth in what was going on in Canto Bight, I felt. If you disagree with that, I'm all right with that, and we can talk about it. But I just don't want us to sling insults at each other without at least trying to understand each other halfway. I've seen numerous times where somebody argued about a plot hole, and it turned out not to be a plot hole at all. They just missed something. And I think those things are important to talk about, because then all of a sudden, if you had 5 big complaints, these were 5 tremendous plot holes, and then you talk about them, you might realize, wait, no, this one actually makes sense. This one makes sense too. This one is explainable, and now you're left with maybe only 2 plot holes. Maybe your criticism goes down, and you went from being enraged to just dissatisfied, you know, and that's actually important, because that can bring you to a point where you're willing to suspend your disbelief a little bit to enjoy what I believe, honestly, is a very well done movie. And I think you got to keep in mind it is a movie also. It's not meant to be 100% perfectly realistic. I mean, I can come up with all kinds of different things. For example, those shuttles, why didn't they just scatter them and all fly in different directions, right? well, maybe they didn't have hyperdrive, okay? But also that wouldn't have made for an interesting movie. They have to sell it to the audience also. Somebody said something about, well, how come Admiral Holdo didn't just tell everybody her plan? Well, yes, that obviously led to a lot of, build up and and led to a couple of important scenes in the movie. So is it just a contrivance just to sell you on what was going on? Well, that one's kind of easy to explain because they thought there was a spy, or how are they tracking us? There's something going on. So obviously she's not going to tell everybody the plan, because the common thought at the time was, well, it looks like we have a spy, and we've got this one guy who keeps asking what's going on. So that, to me, that makes perfect sense why she didn't tell him. But you also have to think it is a movie, and it is trying to take you for a ride. If it tells you everything up front, then the ride becomes less enjoyable, and so it's kind of this balance where you have to realize it's not going to be the perfect film, but it's still a good film. I believe it's a good film. And if you've got some real legitimate complaints, I urge you to voice them. Tell me in the comments section below. Tell me over on Crabbok.com. Let's talk about them. And I don't necessarily want to feel like I have to defend the movie and defend the fact that I just enjoyed the movie. And I don't think you should try to really put anybody on. And this goes for both sides. We shouldn't force people to defend their position, if they don't want to. Don't tell somebody they're stupid because they disagree with you. Oh, you liked the movie? Well, you're an idiot. That's not healthy. And there are so many things that we are fighting about in the world today, and that people are getting ugly with each other about in the world today, that Star Wars is supposed to be one of those things that we don't. Star Wars is supposed to be something to unite us. And if we can't stay united as a group and as a people, then that's a real shame. And each one of you should do your best to stay united with your Star Wars community, to stay united as a fan base over this one thing that we share. We should not be fighting with each other about Star Wars. We should not be being ugly to each other about Star Wars. We're allowed to have different opinions. We've always had different opinions. How many of you think Empire was the best Star Wars movie? A lot of people do, but some people don't. For me, my personal favorite was Jedi, for different reasons. I'm not saying you're wrong. I grew up at a time where Jedi was the first movie I saw, and so my first Halloween costume was an Ewok. So Jedi, to me, has a lot of personal significance. That's just my opinion. I acknowledge Empire was fantastic, and it probably is objectively the best Star Wars movie of all time, if not one of the best movies of all time. However, personally, I liked Jedi better. I have my own tastes, and that's maybe that's why you follow me. Maybe that's why some of you guys subscribe to me, because I have my own position, but I don't try to tell anybody that they're wrong for having a different position. I will tell you you're wrong if you're being ugly to other people, though, because you shouldn't do that, especially over Star Wars. So regardless, I think the movie is very divisive because of the fact that some people looked at it from maybe like an Academy Award-winning movie to, on the other hand, some people looked at it as a Star Wars movie, a fun movie, and so it's hard to try to please everybody. But this movie really surprised me with how divided people were. I encourage you to see it a second time, process everything from a different point of view, and try to have meaningful discussion with each other about this movie. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. I would appreciate some comments. Let me know. Let's talk about this movie a little bit more with an open mind. I think that we have, I think there's a lot of great things that can come as a result of this movie, but we've got to stay united, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day, and may the Force be with you.